So as we get underway, friends, again, I want to introduce Julie and City. Julie is, again, a wonderful expert in this work of trauma-sensitive schools, and she's going to be leading us in today's session. And you're going to have an opportunity to see how wonderful a person she is too as we go through this. So as we do, just understanding, and we're here for up to 90 minutes. This is session 3 of a 5-part series in partnership with DPI this COVID year, if you will. Around mental health and resilience. We know that this is a huge need for so many places, so we're glad you could join us. Julie will be taking you, besides through the content, also some breakout opportunities. The chat is also open, and we will be monitoring the chat as we go to get to the questions we can in the time allotted. And then finally, it is recorded today, this session, so if for some reason you have to step away, which we hope you don't have to, just know that within 24 hours, we expect to get the full recording out to you with the survey as well. So without further ado, again, thanks for joining us. Thank you, Julie, for leading us in this. And hello, Mrs. Julian City.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone, for being here. As Joe said, I'm Julian City. I'm the school social work consultant at the Department of Public Instruction, and I lead our work on trauma-sensitive schools in coordination with our WISH Center, Wisconsin Safe and Healthy Schools Center, and now all of our CSAs we support as well. So there's a CSA lead in each area that is the champion for trauma-sensitive schools and offers some professional development and coaching experiences around trauma-sensitive work. So today I'm going to get my screen sharing going here with you. And I've provided a handout that has a lot of different resources and links for you. And that will be provided by AWSA for you. So as we get started, I know you're very busy, have a lot going on, and I just want to give us a chance to get grounded. Of course, a trauma-sensitive practice, but also a good one, and to provide you with another resource that you can use with staff. This De-Stress Monday, you can Google search De-Stress Monday. They have a number of different great tips for how to start out your week great, and they have these gifts that help with breathing exercises, can be used with staff or students. So I'm going to give you a chance now to focus on the screen, and as the ball moves across the top, we're going to inhale and hold, and exhale, and hold. We inhale the light and the positive. We exhale the dark and that which doesn't serve us. All right. Well, we'll continue on in this space, maybe a little bit more grounded and refreshed. Just so you know where we're going, we're really going to look at some of the stressful aspects and impacts of the pandemic on our students and staff. And then we're going to consider some system improvements using the TSS policy review tool and some other resources I've got for you today. And we can ground ourselves in the knowledge that things have changed, things are changing, and we have the strength and the resilience to be able to get through it and get to a better place. So I love this quote by Jimmy Dean. I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination. This also helps us remember that hopeful orientation that can be so important to building resilience in this time. And, you know, SAMHSA does a lot of work in crisis response and disaster relief and trauma work, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Administration. And they have done a lot of research on that, and they have found that actually, maybe counterintuitively, but the human's most natural response to a crisis is resilience. And so if we can help hold up a mirror to our staff and our students to remind them of the resilience they have and the resilience that they're building, that can really contribute to that hopeful orientation and positive outcomes. And just so we're all on the same page, when I talk about resilience, what I'm using the definition is the ability to overcome challenges of all kinds and to bounce back stronger, wiser, and more personally powerful. I just love that thought, to be more personally powerful. I don't know that I'm there yet with this pandemic. I've got my ups and downs, right? Maybe we all do, but to think that I really can come out of this more personally powerful, and I can help to develop the assets and strengths and leadership abilities in our students and help them to become more personally powerful and to come out of this experience more personally powerful. Part of that work is the resilience development work, and there's whole other workshops and trainings that we can do to help understand how to develop these aspects in youth and in adults. But what I like to, and this is just one model, this is Ken Ginsberg. He does a lot of work. He's got his Fostering Resilience website and books, and he has the 7 C's. And so competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. And Ken lets us know that if we are working to build these in our students, that can help build their resilience over time. So even students that have been affected by trauma in the past can really move forward as we focus on these and focus on being on the positive factors that we can wrap around students in our school environments. And just as we're looking today at policies through the trauma sensitive values, you can also look at classroom practices and school-wide practices through these 7 C's and thinking, is what we're doing building and contributing to these 7 C's? So while we're talking about definitions, and many of you are familiar with this definition of trauma, the exposure to an event that threatens or harms the physical or emotional integrity of the individual or someone close to the individual, that overwhelms the person's ability to respond and creates significant difficulty in functioning. So we're not talking about an event with trauma, we're talking about the impacts of an event. And this is relevant for these COVID times. You'll hear a lot right now, maybe even in the news, about how we're all undergoing trauma as we go through this pandemic time. And there are some researchers out there and psychologists who say to really caution against saying that everyone's going through trauma. Trauma, there's a clinical diagnosis and definition of that, but certainly everyone's going through increased stress. And thinking about our students coming into our school, they might not all be suffering trauma, but they certainly, the preliminary research on this pandemic is showing us that they are coming in with increased anxiety, with fear, right, and with heightened levels of stress. And so what does that mean for us as principals of schools? It means that we want to be thinking about those universal practices. We know that so many of our staff and students are being affected, that we want to look at our universal practices of what we're doing. And then for the students who really are undergoing this more significant trauma, then what are our trauma specific interventions that we have in place for that? What's our referral pathway look like for early identification and connection to mental health professionals in our school and mental health providers in the community? Another comment when we're thinking about the language we use, what is trauma? When we work with students, Ken Ginsberg tells us that it's really helpful to use language that is accessible to them. So instead of saying, wow, you've really gone through a lot of trauma in your life, or your child's gone through trauma, instead he likes to use the phrase, people who have had hard lives with a big hurt. And so, just helping to think about what might the people I'm talking to understand, and understanding that someone's had a hard life, understanding there's been a big hurt there, that's something that people can really connect to. Also, of course, I'm not going to get into all these details, but they are here for you to look at. Just recognizing there are differences in trauma and stress, making sure we're not saying that an adverse childhood experience will equal trauma, right? It's an experience. Trauma is not an that's one event, whereas trauma is an experience, and we can have trauma symptoms as related to that adverse childhood experience that we experienced. And then also, it feels like these days what's really happening in schools where we really have to focus is on the bottom half of this chart, right? We're not only undergoing a pandemic, we're also undergoing a time of increased awareness about systemic oppression and racism in our society, as well as we're thinking about our staff, the secondary and vicarious trauma, the compassion fatigue, right? That's going on right now for adults. We have to be thinking about this insidious historical trauma, and that's looking, generation after generation, what our policies and our institutions have been doing to students and oppressing and marginalizing students and leading to disparate outcomes. And then the racial trauma, that's speaking to everyday trauma because of racism and oppression, things like microaggressions, implicit bias, explicit bias that our students of color are facing. So what is a trauma-sensitive school? So trauma-sensitive school is an innovation, right? So instead of just a strategy or a practice, it's the way we do everything. It's looking at all of our policies and practices and philosophies through these values of safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment, and making sure that our staff understand how trauma impacts learning, and then making sure that we've got a way to respond to that. And so those, again, on the more higher levels of students really impacted by trauma, we're looking at trauma-specific interventions, and then maybe even clinical interventions at a higher level for that. Um, and then just knowing that it's trauma sensitive, like all the things we do, right? It's our trauma sensitive strategic planning process. It's our trauma sensitive entry into the building process. It's part of our multi-level systems of support. And again, though, that focuses at the universal level. What are we doing for all students? And again, just to reemphasize that students don't wear signs on their back. We don't know. Even our pupil service staff who work closely with students don't always know when a student has survived trauma or is currently going through that. Staff's not going to know about that certain student. So we really need to make sure we're doing these practices with all students. These are good for all students. And then as our staff become educated about how trauma impacts students and learning, then they can make sure that they are aware of how to identify that in a student and then get them the right supports that they need. So, thinking about how trauma affects students, even thinking about like, we might have a really hyper aroused youth in the classroom, and they might be really attending to the tone of the teacher's voice instead of the content of the lesson. And so that shows us how, even though we want to focus on academics, we want students to have good math and reading outcomes, students can't access math and reading until they feel safe and comfortable, and they're no longer paying attention to all these threats like the tone of the voice of the teacher, but instead thinking about what is the content of what's the teacher telling us. Here's another way to conceptualize a trauma-sensitive environment. This is the 4 Rs from SAMHSA. And again, just emphasizing that we have to realize that trauma impacts students and learning, then recognize the signs and symptoms. This is, again, where your referral pathway comes in, involves about early identification. Responding includes your preventive measures that you're taking. It involves specific interventions with students, and then resisting re-traumatization. This is such an important one. We're thinking about not only triggers, like, do we know a student is going to have a reaction to a loud noise? And so if we're going to do a fire drill, we're going to have a plan to talk to that student in advance so the student knows the fire drill is happening. They have a safe adult coming to work with them and maybe walk them to the fire drill space that they need to be in, right? So that's working with the individual. But then looking at our system, resisting re-traumatization also looks at trying to dismantle systems of oppression, institutional racism, racist policies. And so questions that we can ask ourselves is, in what way does our own system cause trauma? How could we be contributing to trauma in our students and staff? And then what are we going to do about it, of course? So I want to give you a chance right now. We're going to go into this discussion and to just be thinking about, you're here today for a reason. Have a chance to talk with each other. Where do you see the need for trauma-sensitive schools philosophy and practices in your current setting and context, in the current setting and context of the larger world right now, right? Pandemic, election, racism, and what change, what would you see? What would a change be if you updated a current policy or practice through the trauma-sensitive lens? So I'm going to put those questions into the chat so you have those as you go into your breakout room. And I'm going to get those set up for you. Okay. Okay, so again, you've got 10 minutes and then we'll bring us back together. What questions do you have before you go into the breakout room? All right, I'll see you in 10 minutes. So if you're not familiar right now, you should see a pop-up on your screen that you can enter that room. Great. All right, I think everybody's back now. I'd love to hear from both groups. So if there were any common feelings or thoughts going on, or what were some of the highlights? Can anyone speak from their group? What was going on?
I guess I can jump in. I got switched from groups, so sorry about the first group. We were just starting to introduce ourselves, and I got transitioned, so that's fine. But I think with group two, we were just really thinking about our staff. I know trauma sensitive schools really focusing on how we can be more inclusive and understanding to all of our students. But I think given the current situation, in me personally, just speaking from my own situation, I really wasn't thinking as much about the staff at the beginning of the year, but then as we kind of got into this and as some cases started to happen and anxiety and things like that were starting to arise in the staff, it made me realize how much more attention I need to be paying to kind of the pulse, so to speak, of my building and the staff's anxiety and how they're feeling about the current situation. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about, I know Eugene's considering doing a book study, but would that be maybe a little bit too much at this particular point in time? Was just kind of thinking about how do we keep moving forward, but yet recognizing that our teachers really do have a lot on their plates right now, and maybe one other thing could maybe push them over the edge.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for your attention to your staff. I'm going to share with you some specific resources that you can use to work with your staffs. So thanks. And from the other group, what was first and foremost on your minds?
I can get started, and anyone, Nick and Katie, if you want, certainly chime in here. Really, the thing we kind of focused on, right, it came up was, just shifting for students from going from maybe a hybrid model to a virtual model, and that stress that's there when if kids are asking, why were you gone for 14 days, and just how to navigate through that. Similarly, I think it would also be applying to staff and how, again, there's all that uncertainty that goes along with that. So.
Yeah, thanks. It's just so tricky, such difficulty these days. And just always thinking about how can we make our schools a safe haven for all of the chaos and how everything else going on in people's lives and our staff and our students and our lives. But then we come into school and it feels like a breath of fresh air, that, ability to focus and be connected to people. So it's a safe haven. Thanks for bringing that up. We're going to talk about resources for both of those things today. So I'm going to share my screen again and talk a little bit more about, we hear a lot about Maslow before Bloom, right? And I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with that. Just wanted to give you this extra graphic. So some of the things I share with you, it's really so that you have them to share with your staffs or with parents or with other folks that you're talking with, so that they can understand. Because I know that in some school districts and some schools, parents are really pushing academics. My kids are falling behind. There's math, there's reading, that's what you need to be paying attention to. And this is just a reminder that you can't get to math and academics because that's in the prefrontal cortex. To access that part of your brain, you have to be stable in the lower part of your brain. And so that's what this is asking. Are your students' basic needs being met? If not, get your school social worker involved, get your community resources involved to help them with that. Do they feel safe? Are you using good practices related to like COVID physical practices and masks and social distancing and all of that? But then that emotional safety, which we'll talk more about. Do they feel connected? Is there belonging? Are you, intentionally, are teachers intentionally weaving these practices throughout their days, the classroom days, of making that family feeling, that belonging feeling? The self-esteem piece, that's that building the resilience. building mastery for students and where they can feel competent, and then self-actualization. That's where they've met their full potential. These next couple of slides, again, are just to remind folks who might not understand about learning that we can't access that learning, that math and reading, until we feel safe and secure in all of our other aspects in our emotional aspect. We know that the brain never stops growing, changing, and responding to interactions and environments. This is a reminder we can't give up on students, right? We all have that student that we worked with where we saw this phenomenal growth that other people maybe didn't think was possible. Maybe we didn't think it was possible, but just a reminder of that growth mindset that we can all learn in all aspects. I worked with this 3rd grade student. You might have worked with him too, but he when I first met him, he was laying on his back while I was teaching 2nd step. In this classroom, there was like pods of 4 desks, and he would crawl underneath them. And he, like, throughout the whole class period, as I'm teaching, he's crawling under desks. This student had significant traumas in his life, and a teacher who hadn't been teaching from the understanding of how trauma impacts learning, she might not have recognized that trauma could be behind some of his behaviors, not to make that assumption, but to allow for that possibility. And so because this teacher was aware of that, the work that she did throughout that year, I worked with the family and got them resources. I supported the teacher with some ideas around classroom practices, just so much around welcoming, around that 7 C's. How can we build competence and confidence? And we put in place an intervention where at the end of the day, he got to work on learning how to cook, which solved 2 problems because he really needed more food in his life as well. He had a mentor, a staff person was working with him on learning how to cook. He was also learning how to cook because his parents weren't always around to help him do that. And at the end of the year, right, his math and reading scores increased dramatically. His connection to school, he attended every single day, and was in such like a happier, better place. And this is a student that if they had come up against a school system that didn't understand trauma, I could see him as being, even a drop, all the way as far as a dropout right now. But the amazing work of that teacher was able to do to make big change. So again, just effective learning only happens in relationship. So only when there's physical and emotional safety, when there exists a sense of belonging, connection, and engagement, and when there are opportunities for challenge, failure, and success. We have to build that culture where failure is necessary for learning. Emotional and social relationships affect learning. We know that interest and excitement increases learning. So that's your differentiation and your hands-on learning. Fear and anxiety and self-doubt reduce learning. With trauma, it's very big to make sure we're not shaming students. We're not outing them and shaming them, and giving them as much choice and control as we can provide. And of course, social and emotional skills. So are we building social and emotional learning practice into all of our lessons and curriculum and day, right? Social and emotional learning, it's not a curriculum just like second step. Second step's great, but then you also need to weave it in throughout the day and teaching educators how to do that. Social emotional learning and trauma sensitive skills go hand in hand. So trauma sensitive social emotional learning is a strategy to help students who've been affected by trauma and who may have lost some of those skills or never built them to begin with, as well as a trauma sensitive environment is conducive to learning social emotional skills. So this picture here is just a reminder that this pandemic is different for all of us. Even though we're all going through a pandemic, we have all these different areas where it might be affecting us. And for our students, to help them see that if they have a place where there's great difficulty and challenge, that we might be able to access some of these other areas of strength and to help them through the area of challenge by really focusing on the strength and assets that we have. And even for our own lives and for our staff life, to recognize that we're all being affected differently in these different areas and to give each other and ourselves compassion and grace as we go through this. We also have to consider how racism and violence and oppression is affecting all of us differently. And then what that means for our students and our staff, especially our students and staff of color. So as I said, recognizing this differential impact is important to know that our people of color, especially our Black communities, have really been highly impacted by the coronavirus. So research on the coronavirus shows us that race plays a factor in who gets sick, who gets access to better healthcare, who has the ability to access different resources around supports and even in the community. And then it also just brings up the historical trauma that that our students have faced. They've been highly impacted by recent community and system violence, highly impacted by intergenerational transmission of trauma. So what I mean there is they've done studies that show how trauma can be passed down in the DNA of our cells from one generation to the next, but also thinking about how a perfectly normal and adaptable response to trauma can, over time and over years, we can just see that response and forget that it was a response to a trauma. And so that response can start to look like a personality trait instead of that response to trauma. And over more years and decades, we can believe that, and that person can internalize that it's their personality, whereas it's really all just stemming from this response to trauma. And so how can we help them understand that? That's going to be a clinician's work, but the school can help connect them to a clinician. But again, anytime that we can hold up for them their assets, strengths, and resilience, holding up that mirror for them to see that, it can be really helpful. And then just recognizing how, over generations and years, it can start to be confused. The response to trauma can be confused as culture, whereas actually it's not culture, it's just the response to trauma. And then impacted by systemic racism, we know we continue to have differential data for our students in Wisconsin. So again, just always, are we thinking about resilience? Trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. It's a highly effective tool of safety and survival. We can really get into some bad outcomes when we are looking at trauma as a deficit, or we're assuming, oh, that's a student of color, they must have trauma, and they're acting out, they have trauma in their life. And always talking about trauma as a deficit, as opposed to, they survived trauma. Look how resilient they are. What have they learned from this? How can we build on that? Right, as an individual, as a community. And a response to that can be culturally responsive, trauma-sensitive schools. So we know we need to engage by providing support and guidance for staff to engage in these conversations about how race, gender, socioeconomic status, and other important identities are sources of both stress and strength during the crisis. We can ask, so encourage staff to ask colleagues, students, and their families how to make the virtual or physical classroom more welcoming to all, and to advocate, to actively seek to address inequalities, inequities experienced by students of color within the school and healthcare system. And the article that's linked on this slide provides more detailed steps about how to do this. So who else needs our attention? You guys, you already told me who else needs our attention. You guessed it before I told you. It's our staff, of course. They're struggling so much, right? The staff who have to teach in person and virtually and hybrid, and have 3 kids of their own that are, in their space. And there's so much going on for our staff right now. So thinking about what are we doing as systems to support them. Here's a meme that can highlight some of what I'm hearing from staff right now. Every company, we'd like to promote mental health in the workplace. Employees, how about hiring more people so we feel less pressured, and increase our pay so we can keep up with the spiraling cost of living so we're not so stressed out? Every company. No, not like that, try yoga. So this is kind of funny, but unfortunately it's really true. So I've been running these school social work networking meetings these days, and the school social workers also tell me how their staff are feeling. And what I'm hearing from people is they say it feels almost like gaslighting when their principals tell them, you're burned out, just do some self-care, right? Light a candle, do yoga, go for a run. And they expect their staff to check their email on the weekend. And they expect their staff to be available in the evening. And they put their staff on another committee, right? So we can't just tell our staff, hey, really focus on you, if we aren't looking at our system and what it's implying to staff. I was working with a principal who has really worked to figure out how to set her emails so that they auto send on Monday mornings instead of over the weekend. So even though she as a principal is working on Saturday or Sunday, she doesn't send the email on Saturday or Sunday. She auto times it to send on Monday, so that her staff, right? You get your staff that are the go-getters, and they are checking their email on Sunday to see if there's anything up. And then it stresses them out. But instead of getting the email on Sunday, they can have a good night's sleep. They wake up on Monday more fresh and ready for the week, because now they see the email of what they need to deal with on Monday. So there's little things like that, thinking about, are there things that we can do so that we're not implying to our staff, you should be working on the weekend, that we're not implying to our staff, you should be doing more. And that's, again, with language. You're doing amazing. I love what you're doing here. The same kinds of techniques we use with students to highlight all the things we want them to do. Same thing with staff. And then there's some additional concrete tools that we can use. I love this assessment. I also put on here some building and classroom practices. It's not the focus of today's webinar, but I'd be remiss not to give them to you. They're very helpful. And I'm actually going to give us a chance to dig into this systems assessment here. So I am going to pull this up, and you have the link to it as well. And maybe Joe can help me get it linked into the chat box. The Center on Great Teachers and Leaders from AIR has put together this assessment. They have 3 assessments that are really good. First, we're going to start with this one. This is a systems assessment, and it's about building trauma-sensitive communities, school communities during this time. So you come down here to this section, and it gives you, it's pretty long. We're just going to do a section of it here in a minute for you to think about. But so basically, these are all the things you want to be doing, right? That research is telling us, and AIR is really amazing with research. This is good evidence-based stuff. So this is what they're telling us we should be doing. And then we're going to think about our system. Do we feel like this is never happening? It's rarely happening, sometimes or often. And then obviously, after we've rated it, we're going to go back and look at it and say, where is the areas that we're not attending to? And can I put one action step in place there for how we're going to move forward? So right now, I'm going to give you time. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes at least to go to page 14. And there is a section here. Let me scroll down to, you can see how long it is. You don't have to do it all at one time. And it can be great to lead a team through this, right? Or even like a professional learning community or a team that's working on chunks of this at a time. But right now I'm going to give you time. I invite you to go down here to page 14 and to just rate this section. So there's 12 questions, especially we're just looking at the staff piece of this because we're focused on staff right now. So do you all have the link? Can you bring that up and take a moment to rate your system? What questions do you have on that? Okay, I'm going to give you a moment to do that then.
I want to make sure I have the right document in the chat. If not, I'll get another one in there, Julie.
Okay, so it should say leader self-assessment up on the side. It's the communities. Let me see, I can stop my share and take a look and make sure I've got that. Yep, that's the right document. Yep, so page 14 is what we're looking at, the staff section. Thanks, Joe.
Of course.
Julie, just gonna ask for a bit of clarity here. So
Yep.
That first question there, are we looking at this prior to our current COVID situation, or you want us to respond to this at our current situation?
Today, how are you feeling today? What's going on today? Yep, these assessments were created in April, so some of the language does speak to like when you open in the fall, but I think it's fully relevant for today. All right, maybe just by a show of fingers, how many more minutes do you need? 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Zero minutes, okay. All right, well, I'm curious if someone can respond to, as you're going through that, just that one piece of that self-assessment, what's coming up for you? What's really standing out for you?
The one that kind of struck me is having opportunities for staff to share their cultures with each other. I don't necessarily think that that's something that kind of focused on, and certainly something to really have us to maybe consider how we can incorporate that into some of our faculty meetings. Again, and it's kind of interesting that today in our K6 meeting, admin meeting, that fifth one on there about gratitude. That's what our inclusion activity was for today. So the different ways that people are seeing gratitude.
That's great. Yeah, does anyone have, what are some examples that you're doing right now in your systems to show gratitude for your staff?
Each week we send out a Friday's kudos. Actually, we send it out on Monday and Thursday and let staff appreciate somebody else, either anonymously or they can put their name to it, and then we collect them all and put it on one document and send it out on Friday. So that hopefully everybody has something good to look forward to leaving on Friday.
Yeah. And do you do anything to check to see if at some point in time all of your staff get some type of appreciation? I know sometimes that can be an issue with that type of staff shout out, where maybe the same people continue to get shout out, though they might deserve it.
I've been very creative a couple times of finding those people that have not received their proper due.
Sure. That's great. Thanks. Yeah, so so you can think about that tool. Like I said, taking a leadership team through all or part of that tool to really looking for different areas, because when staff are saying, when principals tell me to do self-care, it's making it harder for me, making more stress for me. Then we have to really think about what can I actually do in my system to change how staff are feeling, and that assessment is one way to do that. All right, I'm going to share my screen again and show you. So then this other one, let me see. So I'll just show you quick again. So if we're having a chance to look at classroom practices, and this again would be really nice for a group of teachers to do through sort of like a professional learning community, or to talk about in a teacher team. And this is where they're rating themselves and how they relate to the students, and is it in a trauma sensitive way? And there's just so many, it's long, so encouraging folks to do so in sections, but it can really not only does it get you thinking about your practices, but it gets you realizing what you should be striving for, I think, even more importantly. All right. So another tool that we have is the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. Has anybody interacted with the Compassion Toolkit at all in your system? Eugene, you have? Can you speak to that at all? How have you used it?
Yeah, so actually that's where that kudos thing came from, was my Compassion Resilience team at another school. And we are actually sending 5 people, actually are at it right now, a Compassion Resilience training, so that we can bring it into Marshall.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you were able to use just a piece of it. I did want to highlight that we have, it's all free, it's all online. And if you go through the whole thing completely with trained facilitators, it can be like a 2-year experience, but you can also just grab, even like a people service staff member, somebody can, you as a principal can grab just one piece of it. And it's just very, I think, laid out really simply, where it tells you the activity, the introduction to it. It gives you, tells you distribute this to all people. These are the key activities. This is what you should do. So it's very intuitive that somebody can walk staff through this. There is a training for facilitators so that it obviously enhances their ability to deliver this. But just really important to know that this is here and you can just grab one tool from it. You don't have to do the whole 2 years. They also did an update for COVID. These are really nice, just short little snippets you could send to staff in an email or watch one of them in a staff meeting, provide these to staff, again, looking at all these different areas that are going to build their resilience and make them feel happier, more meaningful about their jobs, more connected, hopefully more supported. And so then if you're thinking, wow, I don't have time to do these big system things necessarily right away, I'll look into the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, but Julie, what can I do like right now in this very moment to help my staff and how they're feeling? This is just a reminder that people ask the world, they ask other people implicitly these 3 questions. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you believe in me? And anytime we can answer affirmatively one of these questions for somebody, we greatly increase their connection to us, their connection to their own self-compassion, to their own skills and abilities and resilience. So thinking about our emails to others, when I send an email, I read this article that talks about, assuming the other person is smarter than you, busier than you, and more dedicated to the cause than you are, and what that does for the tone of the email really can change it, even if they're not more dedicated or busier or smarter than you. But just, just approaching people in conversations with these thoughts in mind, are you really showing staff that you hear them, you see them, and you believe in them? The other thing I think is important when helping staff with fatigue and burnout is encouraging them to set boundaries. Boundaries around their time and their schedule, but also boundaries in their interpersonal relationships. And staff can burn out easily if they are investing over involved with students and families. And this is especially true of pupil service staff, but teachers, right? And there's this wonderful article here, and I've linked it in your handout, Role Clarity and Boundaries for Trauma-Informed Teachers. What I love about this article is it's written by a teacher for teachers, and it asks, these are some questions that teachers can be asked or can consider on their own. I love in here, it talks about if a student says to you, wow, you are the only adult that I can talk to, instead of feeling like that's a good thing, a teacher should see that as a red flag and realize that they need to get the student connected to other adults, connected to other peers, right? So there's a lot of really good considerations for that in this article. I'd encourage you to check that out, because important boundaries are this really lead to self-care. For ourselves, right? We have to start with ourselves and have self-compassion. Self-compassion makes us happier. Practicing self-compassion leads to more happiness, optimism, gratitude, better relationships. There's research that shows that we would be less stressed and then more resilient. Again, there's an assessment that can be helpful with this and that you can use for yourself, for educators. I also provided you Dr. Kristen Neff's 5-minute compassion break. This is a great one to send to staff. It's just really helpful or to do together in a smaller group. It does make people cry though, so a large group staff meeting is maybe not the best place. But I wanna again give you a few minutes for yourself here. Let me see, on page 4 of this self-assessment, again, maybe Joe, you can help me get this linked in the chat. Give people just a couple minutes to look at page 4. And this is for yourself. If you are not in a good place, then you can't support your staff. And if your staff aren't supported, they can't support our students. So just again, take a few minutes and look at page 4 and read over some of these and consider yourself and how are you doing in these areas. I'm going to give you a few minutes now to look at that.
And Julie, I'm just trying to make sure I have the right one. There's lots of resources.
Yeah,
This
sorry.
is title, there's like 20, so I want to make sure I have the right one.
Here, I'll put it, I can grab it here. Where did I put that? So it is the educator.
Educator resilience and trauma-informed self-care, that one?
Yeah. Oh, and I
Okay,
see
I got it.
You got
No
it
worries.
now. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
It's coming here in just a second, folks. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. Oh, and I see.
Joe, I put it in the link already.
Oh, you did.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks for getting it there.
In those earlier discussions, small group discussions, I had put the questions in the chat, but I never pushed enter, so you didn't see them. Anyway, take a minute for yourself and look at those assessments.
Great. No worries. Thanks, Dean.
So again, which of those questions sort of stands out for you?
I'm going to just say something about that fourth one from the bottom there. You know, there certainly is that rabbit hole to go down, and I'm going to say that we've been trying to really stress that there's actually been some silver linings that have happened in the circumstances that we're in. One of the things that we shared with Nick, Katie and I did, is that our PLCs have become a bit more tight across the district, and we're having grade level teams, not just within a building, but across the district, being really consistent on their instructional delivery. It's no longer this building or this building or this building, but they look themselves as a group. The asynchronous and this in-person hybrid people are just spot on, and they're utilizing each other and expressing the gratitude that that they have for each other and helping them through this.
Thanks for sharing that example. Yeah, it's such a good strategy to have people look for the positives, the silver linings, right, in the challenges that we're going through. Great.
Yeah, Julie, if I may too,
Yeah.
I don't think Dean and Katie will share it, but I know I've seen examples. They both, I think it was a year ago, you two, right, where you made self-care commitments. And first it became something they shared with each other, as I would describe it, as accountability partners. And then they decided to share that with their staff. Here's what we're doing, because we think this is important to intentionally, you know, even have that language and that concept about self-care, and show what they're doing and how they have a partner to kind of hold them accountable in a good way around it. And then some activities they were, you know, offering for people to do it, like over a lunch if they wanted to join them. And so it was like a nice pairing of modeling and opportunity. And I'm sure that had an impact on others thinking about how they might take some similar moves themselves. And I just love the humane leadership and the caring leadership that modeled. So again, I don't know if they would share that, but that's another way I saw them doing some things as leaders that it influenced the thinking and the doing of their staff that they serve and lead.
It's an
Good
excellent
job,
example.
you two.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Joe, and thanks that you were doing that, that you guys. Thank you so much. That's great modeling. All right, so now we're going to get into the policy review tool. So this is the policy review tool here. This is in module. It's in a number of the online learning series. So if you do want to dig into that a little bit more, it is in the learning series, especially in 6 in module, or in the trauma sensitive strategies module. We're getting away from using the numbers of modules. But so the point of this is so that you can really grab, you can't do all of your policies and procedures, right? But you can maybe, you think about the one that's somewhat problematic. There's something that's, you know, it's coming up for you because it's not leading to the results that you desire. Or it can also be when you're creating some new policy and procedures because of COVID, because of the pandemic. Can you, as you're creating them, can you be thinking about these 5 trauma sensitive values? This sheet walks you through it, and what it's asking you to do is to look at the current proposal, the proposal for your policy that you're doing, you know, thinking about, or if you're looking at an existing one, and think, is it consistent with the results that we want, right? And so you have a team of leadership teams that would go through this document together, really thinking about, you know, that procedure you're thinking about, and then is it consistent? Is it leading to the desired outcomes based on the trauma sensitive schools values? So I'm going to show you some different examples of what we might think about here. But before I give you the examples, I want us to remember the essential question for trauma sensitive schools, right? So we used to think about students and we'd say, oh, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Why are you behaving this way? And so now we know to ask, what happened to you? Not like we're asking a student all these details to tell us about the trauma of what happened to you, but just to keep in mind that orientation of, you know, something has happened for this child. Let's figure it out. Healing-centered engagement tells us to look beyond what happened to you and move to what's right with you. Focus on those assets and strengths and building from those assets and strengths. Then resilience work tells us to go further and to say, how can we support you and empower you to being the best individual, to be more personally powerful, right? But we're missing a question here, and I'm sure you guys might be thinking of it. What do we have to start with? Anytime we have a student and they're not meeting expectations, the very first question shouldn't be what happened to you. It should be, how is our system contributing to the issue, right? So to do that, we can use these values and think about looking at our different policies and procedures through these. So of course, for all of the values, it's not just safety is not just safety, right? It's emotional safety, it's physical safety, relationship safety, contextual safety, all of these different aspects of what safety might look like, and always thinking, does it build relationship? So if we think about something currently, so schools have isolation rooms these days to deal with students who might have some COVID concerns. And if you're thinking about, okay, our current policy is a student is exhibiting some signs, staff gets on their PPE, they walk the student down to one of these rooms, they leave them there, and the kid eventually gets picked up. So now we're going to think about that from using that policy review tool. I'd say, okay, well, that method that system we just talked about, is it consistently providing safety for students? Well, it's safe because we're following all of our great nursing recommended sanitary, social distancing, PPE stuff, but is it providing that emotional safety and psychological safety? And if not, then how can we provide that? Well, so an example of a school that used this tool for their isolation room was to come up with this idea that when staff get all this gear on, they look scary. So first of all, we're going to provide some connection to the staff by printing the staff's picture without the PPE on. And so the staff that responds, we're going to be able to show the student, this is, this is a regular person. This is carrying Mrs. Jones, and here she is. This is what she looks like, right? And here we have to put on this outfit to keep us and you safe. Also, we're going to build trust. We're going to think about trustworthiness by pre-teaching all of our kids that if somebody is exhibiting signs of COVID, this is what's going to happen, so that all kids know in advance what's going to happen and why it's happening to them. That's going to build their trust with what's happening, right? Any place that we can provide some little pieces of choice or some collaboration. Then we also think about empowerment. So here again, are we the words that we're using with kids, do we have healthcare professionals that we're contracting with that are coming into the building, which was the case for this school, and they said those healthcare professionals aren't used to talking to young kids, and so the language they're using is actually kind of scary, right? Or you might have an educational aide that's not as trained in trauma sensitive work, and so they're talking to this kid and their own fears coming out. I hope your whole family doesn't get this COVID. I hope you're able to come back, right? That can increase the student's anxiety. But really talking with the staff about, telling the kid this hopeful orientation. I can't wait till you come back. It's going to be great. Remember, we're going to finish that checkers game that we were playing. We'll get this figured out, like the hopeful orientation talk. I provided some additional some links here to some calming skills, mindful activities, and gratitude practices. Hopefully you're doing these throughout your school day, but also these can be taught to kids to use while they're in an isolation room. Some schools have virtual calming rooms. I don't know if you have these or have seen these, so that students can access this with a computer that gets wiped down and is sanitary while they're in the isolation room or when they're at home on their own, and they have the chance to go into something like this, one of these virtual calming rooms. And then, thinking about, could care packages be sent home? So now the student's going home with mindful coloring pages and coloring pencils and a journaling activity for gratitude and, drawing pictures about what they're looking forward to for coming back to school. And then what's the plan for connection, right? Do you always have, for sure, there's a point staff person who's going to call every kid that's sent home that night and say, we really miss you. We can't wait till you come back. If they're out for 2 weeks, is there some follow-up in between those 2 weeks? Can somebody make some kind of a contact with that student or family? Another example here is communication, right? So you guys are doing a great job, I'm sure, of doing frequent, timely, clear communication with parents. So thinking again about this through the trauma sensitive schools values, for example, thinking about safety with the tone of the email, are using inclusive language, person-centered language. Thinking about trust, there was an example that Elena Aguilar provided. There's the October issue of Educational Leadership provides a lot of articles on trauma sensitive schools. That link is in your handout. And Elena Aguilar in there talks about how she has a student, her son is half Black, and she was really appreciative of these communications from the principal that were in support of like Black Lives Matter. But she said that it wasn't building trust for her because she never heard the principal say what they were going to do about it. And so to look at your communication and think, is it including a plan? So if I'm bringing up an issue, right, like maybe it's Suicide Awareness Month, and so you bring up how on your YRBS there's high rates of suicide, you're really concerned about it. Just bringing that up not going to build that safety and trust. So it's also about telling the parents exactly what steps is your school taking to make change or to solve that problem. And then of course, yeah. Here's some other examples of some specifics. So if you look at a check-in, check-out list, so here is a school, this was their check-in, check-out list. And then they looked at it through the policy tool lens of the 5 values, and they added some considerations. So prior to starting, is there a greeter, establishing a trusting relationship? Is it in a location that's personal and respectful? Right, so here are just some concrete ideas. And again, you have this resource to look at of how this can look when you look at one of your procedures through this tool. Here's a daily progress report example. This school, this was their daily progress report, and they just did this. There's the example is just in this box in the red writing, but so under achievement, so instead of always does their best on work, it's always does their best on work consistent with their ability. They persevere despite challenges. They use coping strategies to deal with their emotion or frustration, right? So just those thoughts about what might a more trauma sensitive language look like. Here's another one, and this is actually from a later module in the Trauma Sensitive Schools online series. And it's in the discipline, Tier 1 discipline module. And so this is real specifically, if you want to look at your discipline policy, this gives some considerations and questions under each of the values. So for example, does that policy reinforce listening to students' histories without judgment, emphasizing the value of emotional safety? Some really good questions to go through with as a team if you're trying to update your discipline policy and expectations, and then just give some space to add comments and changes. So just walking you through all the different considerations and all the different values of the trauma sensitive schools lens, and that's available as an example. And then also here, the emotion regulation plan. So these emotion regulation, that's not the right link. The emotion regulation plans that we have, let's see if I can find the, okay. I'll have to grab it in here out of my other links, COVID TSS resources, that's this. Our emotion regulation plans are online and free if you haven't used them. It can be a helpful tool for students who've experienced trauma to help them understand their triggers as well as some coping mechanisms. And I'm not sure why I'm not finding that tool right away for you. Looks like I didn't link it here. So I'll have to make sure that you get that tool, and that's not going to the right link. But this, you wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm gonna have to make sure I get this one to Joe. And I'm sorry that that's not going to the right link.
Yeah, but no worries. Julie will get that to us, and then I'll make sure I populate it in the shared folder that you have at the start of the chat. So no worries,
Yeah.
you will get it from us.
Yeah, thanks. If you're not familiar with the emotion regulation plans, like I said, they're here. There's also a role play. You can see this video of them being used in action. So of like a pupil service person working with a student on these plans. And it's got the different grade levels. And again, like I said, they're tools that you have a conversation with a student to help understand, when something happens to them, this is the trigger, this is what it might look like, what are their coping skills that they can use, this is how the staff can help them, and then you have your plan of support right there. And so the resource that I don't have for you today is the one that shows how they looked at the process of how they use their emotion regulation plan with students, and then they updated it through the lens of the trauma sensitive schools values. And so then again, just knowing that this tool is here for you, you can grab a team or even just on your own if you're thinking about it, and just grab that, maybe a policy or practice that you're creating right now and proactively create it through this lens, or you've got it, you're like, oh man, this isn't working, right? Whatever procedure it is, it's not working for you. So then go back and think, okay, if we conceptualize this through these 5 values, how might that look different? As I said before, can schools be the eye in the eye in the hurricane, where there's quiet. And if you have listened to Hamilton musical as many times as I have, you're already singing the song in your head. But schools as safe havens are ones that build relationships, focus on emotional safety as well as physical safety, really are thinking about inclusion, building resilience, and offering that hopeful orientation. We are going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. We're going to become more personally powerful for our students and our staff. So I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear from at least two of you on either one thing you learned or relearned, or one thing that you can apply tomorrow, or one next step. Who's willing to share with us some of those thoughts?
I'll go ahead.
Thanks, Dean.
This calm and caring spaces that you that slide and the virtual calming room and those mindful activities, I think it'd be something that I'd like to share with our staff to have for students to access as needed. And the other thing that I really liked knowing that I didn't know about was the compassion resilience toolkit and the COVID material that's in there. I find that might be very helpful, and I like the little video vignettes that are in there.
Great, thanks, Dean. Let's hear from one more person. What are something you learned or relearned, something you can apply, a next step?
Yeah, like Dean, I thought that virtual calming room, I had students come to mind right away in terms of using that. And then the other piece I thought of was just making sure, letting staff know that, yeah, I see them, I hear them, and then just reinforcing that I believe in what they're doing, and letting people hear that, and then hopefully having them then let kids know that they think the same.
That's great, thank you. Well, I just so appreciate all of you being here today, and Joe, for you to give us this space to focus on this important topic. Are there any last questions or resources that I can provide for you? All right, again, I'll get you that other resource and make sure that you're checking out some of those links I provided in the handout. There's a lot of good stuff there. So great job. Thank you for everything you're doing. Good luck out there.
Yeah, and thank you, Julie. And if I may, let me just share my screen real quick here. And and I just want to pull up one last piece before we close out. So you can see again, Julie, thank you for your excellent instruction. And as always, it's just it's great to see, your good work so thoughtfully done, so caring, in such a caring way. So appreciate that so much. As I said up front, folks, you can see she's not just a very thoughtful person, but she's also just a wonderful human being, and the integrity runs through everything she does. So you can see my screen. You can see the webinar series on the screen. Is that true? You can see this, everybody?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just a reminder, if you're trying to tracking this, and I share this because as we poll our members, over 2,000 members in various ways, the continued priority we see is mental health and resilience support, or mental health and SEL support. We continue to see that. And so that's why and yet we know that people have a hard time this year, like coming to a multi-day academy. So we've made the adjustment. I just want to speak to what you're seeing and why. The need exists probably as much or more than ever. And we're trying to adapt with the webinar series rather than an academy approach, because that's what we think can equip the most people. And I know that there are many more people interested today that can join us live, which again is why we're recording this, and you'll see it within 24 hours. So if there's someone back home or somewhere in your circle that wanted to be or couldn't, remind them of the link, and you can pass that link on to them once you get it tomorrow, if so be it. But just as a reminder, this is session 3 of a 5-part series, and that started back in late September. And where we're going next with this, as you scroll through and see what we just accomplished today with Julie, session 4 will be in December 8th specifically, and it's going to be involving Dr. Chad Rose, who's the director of a bullying prevention lab at the University of Missouri. And you can see it around some of the bullying investigation pieces. So we're happy to have him be part of that. And then the last piece as well will be session 5 of the series, January 7th, where Julie's colleague, Beth Herman, another DPI consultant, but really in the area of expertise around social emotional learning, will be sharing the topic you see highlighted there. Again, we'll be live. We hope you can join us live if there's interest, or encourage others. Again, there'll be more information about this as we continue to get closer to the dates, but just put that in your calendar if you're so interested, and know that we're continuing to try to help you get connected with this in so many different ways. So again, thanks, Julie. Thank you one and all. May God bless you in your efforts to support, lead, and serve those in your circle, and have a great finish to your work week. Bye-bye, y'all.
I think
Thanks,
so.
Joe. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.